The police officer closed his notebook and said it was a hunting accident. My grandson Tommy was gone, and they believed he just wandered off in the woods. I stood alone in his bedroom after everyone left, my 70-year-old hands shaking as I unzipped his blue backpack. Inside, tucked under his lunchbox, was a single bloody fang. It was large, sharp, and stained dark. I recognized it immediately from my son-in-law Mark's dogs, those brutal animals he keeps penned up behind his house. My heart clenched. This wasn't from any wild animal. This was from one of his fighters. Mark took Tommy hunting and came back alone, claiming the boy got lost. But now I knew. He fed my grandson to those beasts. I wrapped the fang in a tissue and hid it in my sweater pocket. I knew what I had to do. Prove what really happened. I was risking my own safety, but I didn't care. Mark thought he could silence me with his smooth lies. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was my daughter Sarah, Tommy's mother. "Mum, please don't make a scene," she pleaded. "Mark is devastated too." I bit my tongue, promising to stay calm. But after hanging up, I looked at Tommy's photo on the nightstand. His smile gave me strength. I went to the kitchen and found a small plastic bag to preserve the fang. As I sealed it, I noticed a tiny chip on the tooth, a distinct mark. Maybe I could match it to a specific dog. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Mark standing there, his expression grim. He was early for his usual check-in, and I knew he was watching me closer than ever. I opened the door, forcing a smile. Mark stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. "Just wanted to see how you're holding up, Helen," he said, his voice too calm. I offered him coffee, my hands steady only because I practiced this moment. He sat at the kitchen table, where Tommy used to do his homework. "The police case is closed," Mark stated, sipping his drink. "It's time to move on." I had to act normal while gathering evidence. I had to swallow my rage every time he spoke. I nodded, playing the grieving grandmother. "I know, dear. It's just so hard." He leaned forward. "You should consider cleaning out Tommy's room. I can help." He was rushing me to erase any traces. I declined gently, saying I needed time. After he left, I waited 5 minutes, then grabbed my coat. I drove to the local library where I could use a computer without Mark knowing. I needed to research dog breeds and legal steps. Inside, the quiet hum of computers felt safe. I found articles on fighting dogs and how to report animal cruelty. But as I read, a shadow fell over me. The librarian, a young woman, said, "Mrs. Wilkins, your son-in-law just called asking if you were here." My blood ran cold. Mark was having me followed. I quickly logged off and left, clutching my purse with the fang inside. On the drive home, I realized I couldn't trust anyone, not even the places I thought were safe. Back home, I locked the doors and drew the curtains. I needed to find solid proof linking Mark to the dogs. The isolation was hard, but I remembered Tommy's laugh and pushed on. I called my friend Martha, whose son is a lawyer. "Martha, I need advice on something sensitive," I whispered. She promised to have her son call me discreetly. While waiting, I examined the fang again under a magnifying glass. The chip was unique, like a fingerprint. I took photos with my phone, saving them to a hidden folder. Then I remembered Mark's kennel records. He keeps logs of his dog's vet visits and breeding schedules. If I could access those, I might match the fang. But how? Mark lives across town, and his house is always locked. The tension grew when Sarah called again. "Mum, Mark says you've been acting strange. Are you okay?" I assured her I was fine, just grieving. After hanging up, I knew time was short. Suddenly, an idea hit me. The homeowners association meeting was tonight. Mark often attends, leaving his house empty. I could slip in then. I put on a dark jacket and packed a small flashlight. As I headed out, my phone buzzed. It was Martha's son, the lawyer. "Mrs. Wilkins, I can meet you tomorrow morning," he said. I agreed, feeling a flicker of hope. But when I reached my car, I saw a note under the windshield wiper. "Stay out of it, Helen." No signature, but I recognized the block letters from Mark's grocery lists. He was warning me off. I crumpled the note and shoved it in my pocket. I had to get into Mark's house during the meeting and find those kennel records. I was risking getting caught, but I had no choice. I drove to his neighborhood, parking a block away. The streets were quiet, and I saw lights on at the community clubhouse where the meeting was held. I approached Mark's house from the back, through the alley. His backyard fence had a loose board I remembered from when Tommy played here. I slipped through, my heart pounding. The kennel was dark, the dogs silent inside their pens. I hurried to the back door, hoping it was unlocked. Mark must have been in a rush. Inside, I used my flashlight to navigate to his office. Papers were strewn on the desk. I found a folder labeled Kennel Logs and flipped through it. Dates, dog names, medical notes. My hands trembled as I scanned for anything about missing teeth or injuries. Then I saw it. An entry for Brutus, one of his prized dogs, noting a chipped canine tooth removed after a training incident on the day Tommy disappeared. I took photos of the page with my phone. This was the proof I needed. But as I turned to leave, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Mark was home early. I froze, then ducked into a closet just as the front door opened. His footsteps echoed down the hall. He was on the phone saying, "Yeah, she's been snooping. I'll handle it." I held my breath, praying he wouldn't check the office. After what felt like hours, he moved away, and I slipped out the back. Back in my car, I reviewed the photos. The evidence was solid, but now Mark knew I was onto him. I drove straight to my house, my mind racing. I needed to get this evidence to the lawyer safely. I was afraid Mark might escalate things. At home, I printed the photos and stored them with the fang in a locked box. I called Martha's son again, moving our meeting to a public cafe for safety. He agreed, sounding concerned. While preparing, I remembered that Mark has a safety deposit box at the local bank. He once bragged about keeping important documents there. What if he had more evidence hidden? I needed to find a way to access it, but that required legal means. The stress was intense. I felt like I was being watched constantly. I decided to visit the bank tomorrow and ask about procedures, pretending to be interested in one for myself. As I made notes, my doorbell rang. It was Sarah, her eyes red from crying. "Mum, we need to talk," she said, stepping inside. She looked around nervously. "Mark says you're accusing him of horrible things. Is it true?" I hesitated, then showed her the photo of the kennel log. Her face paled. "This can't be real," she whispered. But before she could say more, her phone buzzed. It was Mark. She answered, and I heard his voice, sharp and demanding. "Get back here now, Sarah." She looked at me, torn, then left without another word. I stood alone, realizing Sarah might be under his control too. As I locked the door, I noticed a shadow moving outside the window. Someone was there, watching, and I knew my time was running out. I saw the shadow move away from the window, but I knew they'd be back. My heart hammered against my ribs as I double-checked the locks on all the doors. That evidence in the locked box felt like a ticking bomb. I needed to get it to the lawyer first thing in the morning. But now I wasn't sure if I could wait. If I waited, Mark might destroy the logs or even turn Sarah against me. I decided to hide the box somewhere safer than my house. Up in the attic, behind an old trunk of winter clothes, I found a loose floorboard. I slipped the box underneath, covering it with dust and an old rug. It was a risk, but better than having it out in the open. As I climbed down, my knees ached, a reminder of my age, but I pushed through the pain. Just then, my phone vibrated. It was a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." I deleted it immediately, my hands shaking. I had to assume Mark had someone watching my every move. I packed a small bag with essentials in case I needed to leave quickly. I included the photos I'd printed and a copy of the kennel log entry. Around midnight, I heard a car slow down outside my house. I peeked through the blinds and saw a dark sedan idling across the street. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. I knew I couldn't stay here tonight. I called Martha, my oldest friend, and whispered, "I need a place to sleep tonight. It's not safe here." She didn't ask questions, just said, "Come over now." I grabbed my bag and slipped out the back door, through the garden gate. As I hurried down the alley, I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't look back, but I picked up my pace, my breath catching in my throat. When I reached the main street, I flagged down a taxi. Inside, I finally dared to glance back. The dark sedan was gone, but I knew this was far from over. Martha lived in a quiet apartment complex on the other side of town. She let me in, her face full of concern. "Helen, what's going on?" she asked. I showed her the photos and explained everything briefly. She gasped, her hand over her mouth. "That monster," she whispered. We agreed I'd stay the night, and she'd come with me to the lawyer in the morning for support. Involving her weighed on me. I didn't want to put my friend in danger. But I had no one else. I slept fitfully on her couch, dreaming of Tommy's smile and Mark's cold eyes. At dawn, I woke to the sound of rain tapping against the window. Martha drove us to the cafe where I was meeting the lawyer, her son James. He was a serious man in his 40s, and he listened intently as I laid out the evidence, the fang, the kennel log photos, the note on my car. He nodded slowly. "This is compelling, but we need more to reopen the case. We should report this to the police with a formal complaint, but I knew the local police had already closed it, and Mark might have connections." James suggested we go to a different precinct, one outside our town. The pressure was mounting. Every moment we delayed, Mark could be covering his tracks. As we left the cafe, I saw the same dark sedan parked down the street. My stomach dropped. James noticed my tension and said, "Let's go to my office now. We'll file the report from there." We got into his car, and as we drove away, I watched the sedan in the rearview mirror. It didn't follow, but I knew it was a warning. At James's office, he started drafting the complaint. While he worked, I used his computer to look up more about Mark's dogs. I found an online forum for dog breeders, and there was a post from Mark selling Brutus due to behavioral issues after the date Tommy disappeared. I printed it out, my hands trembling. This was another piece of the puzzle. But when I showed James, he frowned. "This helps, but we need physical evidence from the dog itself to match the fang." I realized I had to get a sample from Brutus. But how? Just then, my phone rang. It was Sarah, crying. "Mom, Mark says you're trying to ruin our family. He's talking about moving away." I felt a chill. If they left, I might never get justice for Tommy. Sarah's call left me shaken. If Mark moved her away, I could lose my daughter forever, and Tommy's case would go cold. I had to act fast. James advised me to stay low while he filed the police report, But I couldn't just wait. I needed to get a DNA sample from Brutus to match the fang. I remembered Mark kept the dogs in a kennel behind his house, and he worked during the day. It was risky. If I got caught trespassing again, Mark might have me arrested, or worse. But I had to try. Martha offered to drive me to Mark's neighborhood and keep watch. We parked a few houses down, and I saw his car was gone. Slipping through the back alley, I found the same loose board in the fence. The dogs started barking as I approached, but I stayed calm, speaking softly. Brutus was in a separate pen, looking aggressive. I needed a hair sample or something with saliva. I had brought a treat and a plastic bag. I tossed the treat near the fence, and as Brutus lunged for it, I used a stick to scrape some drool into the bag. My heart raced. One wrong move, and he could bite through the fence. Just as I sealed the bag, I heard a voice behind me. "What are you doing here, Helen?" It was my neighbour, Mrs. Gable, who lived next to Mark. She looked suspicious. I forced a smile. "Just checking on the dogs for Mark. He asked me to." She didn't look convinced, but nodded and walked away. I hurried back to Martha's car, feeling exposed. Back at her apartment, I stored the sample in the fridge. James called later to say the police had agreed to review the case but needed time. That evening, Martha and I were watching the news when a segment came on about animal cruelty cases. It mentioned Mark's kennel by name, citing anonymous tips. I hadn't sent any tips, so someone else was onto him. But then my phone buzzed with another text. "You shouldn't have involved others." This time, it included a photo of Martha's apartment building. They knew where I was. The photo of Martha's building sent a cold fear through me. I had dragged my best friend into this, and now she was a target. I told Martha, and she paled but stood firm. "We're in this together, Helen," she said. But I couldn't risk her safety. I decided to move to a hotel for the night, paying in cash to avoid traces. James arranged for a friend at a lab to test the dog's saliva sample against the fang, but it would take a few days. The waiting was agony. Every noise made me jump. At the hotel, I tried to rest, but my mind raced. I needed to protect myself and the evidence. I remembered that Mark had a sister, Linda, who never liked him. Maybe she could help. I found her number in an old address book and called her. She answered warily, but when I mentioned Tommy and the dogs, her voice softened. "Mark always had a cruel streak," she said, "but I can't get involved directly. I'll tell you this. He has a storage unit where he keeps old records. The key is in his desk drawer at home." This was a breakthrough, but getting into his house again was dangerous. Failing meant losing any chance of justice. I thanked her and hung up. Later that night, I lay in bed, thinking about Tommy. He loved animals, and the idea that Mark used dogs to harm him made me sick. Suddenly, there was a knock on my hotel room door. I froze, not answering. The knocking grew louder, then stopped. I heard footsteps walking away. I peered through the peephole and saw a man in a hoodie disappearing down the hall. My hands were trembling as I called hotel security. They found no one, but I knew I wasn't safe here. I packed my bags again, ready to leave at first light. As I did, I noticed a slip of paper under the door. It was a drawing Tommy had made for me with "I love you, Grandma" scribbled in crayon. Mark must have planted it to mess with my mind. Finding Tommy's drawing felt like a punch to the gut. Mark was playing psychological games, trying to break me, but it only strengthened my resolve. I checked out of the hotel before sunrise and went to a diner to think. I needed to get into Mark's storage unit, but I couldn't do it alone. James was busy with the legal side, and Martha had already done too much. I decided to hire a private investigator I found online, someone discreet. I met him at the diner, a man named Carl in his 50s with a calm demeanor. I showed him the evidence and explained the situation. He agreed to help for a fee, which I paid from my savings. His first task was to retrieve the key from Mark's desk and check the storage unit. While he worked, I stayed at the public library, using their computers to research more about dogfighting rings in our area. I found a few news articles linking Mark's kennel to past investigations, but nothing stuck. Hiring Carl was expensive, but I had to know what was in that storage unit. Later that day, Carl called. I got the key, but the unit is under alarm. I'll need to disable it tonight. He promised to update me by morning. The pressure was mounting. I felt like I was running out of time and money. I went to my bank to withdraw more cash, and the teller, a young woman named Lisa, noticed my nervousness. "Is everything okay, Mrs. Wilkins?" she asked. I just smiled and said I was fine, but I wondered if Mark had people everywhere. As I left the bank, I saw Sarah waiting outside. She looked tired and anxious. "Mum, we need to talk alone," she said. We went to a nearby park bench. "Mark showed me security footage of you at his house," she whispered. "He's filing a restraining order against you." I felt a wave of despair. If that happened, I couldn't get near him or the evidence. But then Sarah squeezed my hand. "I don't believe him anymore. I found bloodstains on Brutus's collar in the laundry." She had hidden it in her purse. My eyes filled with tears. My daughter was finally on my side. But as we hugged, I saw Mark's car pull up across the street. He was watching us, and his face was pure rage. Mark's car door slammed shut, and he started marching toward us in the park. I grabbed Sarah's arm. "We need to go now," I whispered, clutching the blood-stained collar in my pocket. Sarah's eyes widened with fear, but she nodded. We hurried toward my car parked nearby, my old legs protesting the sudden movement. I fumbled for my keys, my heart pounding. Just as we reached the vehicle, Mark shouted, "Sarah, get away from her!" His voice was cold and commanding. Sarah hesitated, torn between us. I unlocked the doors and pushed her inside, then slid into the driver's seat. As I started the engine, Mark reached the car and banged on the window. "This isn't over, Helen!" he yelled, his face contorted with rage. I drove off, my hands shaking on the wheel. Sarah was crying softly beside me. "He's never been like this before," she sobbed. I knew I had to protect her and the evidence. I drove to Martha's apartment, but I remembered the photo text and decided it wasn't safe. Instead, I went to a motel on the outskirts of town, paying cash again. Inside the room, Sarah collapsed on the bed, exhausted. I examined the collar. The bloodstains were dark and crusted. This could be Tommy's blood. I needed to get it to James for DNA testing, but with Mark filing a restraining order, I had to be careful. Involving Sarah was risky. If Mark turned her against me again, I'd lose everything. Later, my phone buzzed. It was Carl, the PI. The storage unit alarm was tricky, but I'm in. "I found something you need to see." He promised to meet me tomorrow with the contents. As I hung up, I felt a glimmer of hope. But then Sarah's phone rang. It was Mark. She answered, and I heard him demanding she come home. "I'm not coming back, Mark," she said firmly, then hung up. We looked at each other, knowing this was just the beginning. Suddenly, there was a knock on the motel room door. We froze, not making a sound. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. The knocking stopped after a minute, and we heard footsteps retreating. Sarah and I stayed silent for a long time, listening. I peered through the peephole but saw no one. My mind raced. Had Mark found us already? I needed to secure the blood-stained collar and meet Carl safely. I knew I had to get the evidence to the lawyer without being intercepted, but it was dangerous. Every move put Sarah and me in deeper danger. I called James and updated him on the collar. He advised me to bring it to his office first thing in the morning, and he'd expedite the DNA test. I also told him about the restraining order threat. He said he'd look into blocking it. Sarah was shaky, so I made her some tea from the motel supplies. We sat together, and she confessed. "I should have believed you sooner, Mum. I saw how Brutus acted after that day, aggressive and covered in mud." Her support was a relief, but it increased the pressure from Mark. Early the next morning, I left Sarah at the motel with strict instructions not to open the door for anyone. I drove to meet Carl in a supermarket parking lot, as he suggested. He arrived in a plain sedan and handed me a box from the storage unit. Inside were old vet records, photos of the dogs, and a ledger with payments from unknown sources. Carl pointed to an entry. Disposal fee, dated the day Tommy disappeared. My blood ran cold. This was another piece of the puzzle. I thanked Carl and paid him his fee. As I drove to James's office, I noticed a car following me. It was the same dark sedan from before. I took several turns, but it stayed on my tail. I couldn't lead them to James. I pulled into a busy gas station and called James to change the meeting place. He agreed to come to me. While waiting, I hid the box and collar in my trunk. James arrived shortly, and I handed him the items. He promised to handle it discreetly. As he drove away, the sedan pulled up next to me. The window rolled down, and a man I didn't recognize said, "You're making a big mistake, lady." Then he sped off. I stood there, trembling, realizing they knew every move I made. I drove back to the motel, constantly checking my mirror for the sedan. Sarah was safe, but anxious. I told her about the ledger and the disposal fee, and she broke down, crying. "He really did it," she whispered. We held each other, mourning Tommy all over again. Now, I needed to wait for the DNA results and see what James could do with the new evidence. But it was emotionally draining. I felt my age in every ache and pain. James called later that day. The police were reconsidering the case based on the ledger, but they needed the DNA match to proceed. It would take another 48 hours. The pressure was immense. Mark could act at any moment. Sarah decided to file for divorce, which was a brave step, but it meant open war with Mark. I supported her, but I worried about her safety. We moved to a different motel, this time under a fake name I used from an old loyalty card. That evening, I remembered that Mark had a business partner in his kennel, a man named Doug. Maybe he knew something. I found Doug's number online and called him, pretending to be interested in buying a dog. He was friendly at first, but when I mentioned Brutus, he became defensive. "I don't handle that side of things," he said quickly, and hung up. It was a dead end, but his reaction made me suspicious. Later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Back off, or Sarah gets hurt." I showed it to Sarah, and she paled. We decided to involve the police about the threat, but when I called the non-emergency line, they said without evidence of direct harm, it was hard to act. I felt helpless. Just then, Martha called. "Helen, I saw Mark at the grocery store. He was buying supplies like he was going on a trip." My heart sank. If he left town, justice might escape us. I thanked her and hung up. As I paced the room, I noticed a business card stuck in my wallet from a support group for grandparents. I had attended once after my husband died. Maybe they had resources. I called the number, and a kind woman listened to my story. She suggested I contact a victim advocacy group. It was a small relief, but every step felt like walking on glass. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the motel room door, followed by the sound of someone trying to force it open. Sarah and I backed away from the door, clutching each other. The banging stopped, and we heard footsteps running away. I called the motel front desk, and they sent security, but no one was found. We were both shaken. It was clear we couldn't stay here anymore. I needed to find a safer place until the DNA results came back. James had offered his guest room, but I didn't want to drag him deeper into this. Constantly moving was wearing us down, both physically and mentally. Sarah suggested we go to her friend's house in the next county. She had already arranged it secretly. We packed quickly and left before dawn. The drive was quiet, both of us lost in thought. At her friend's house, we were welcomed warmly, but I felt like a burden. I needed to lay low and wait for James's call. Later that day, James phoned. The DNA test on the collar was a match to Tommy. He had enough to get the police to reopen the case officially. I felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. James warned me that Mark might be arrested soon, but he could flee. The pressure was now on the police to act quickly. Sarah was crying tears of grief and validation. We hugged, knowing Tommy would have justice. But then my phone rang. It was Mark. His voice was calm but cold. "I know where you are, Helen. If I go down, I'm taking you with me." He hung up before I could respond. I told Sarah and her friend, and we decided to inform the local police in the area. They sent a car to patrol the house, which was reassuring, but I still felt exposed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about Tommy and how much he loved animals. It was cruel irony that Mark used dogs to hurt him. Early the next morning, James called again. "The police are moving in on Mark today. They have a warrant for his arrest." I should have felt safe, but something nagged at me. Mark was always one step ahead. Just as I was about to share the news with Sarah, her friend's doorbell rang. We looked through the window and saw a police car outside. But when the officer stepped out, he wasn't in uniform. He was wearing a jacket with a kennel logo. The man at the door wasn't a real officer. I recognized the kennel logo from Mark's business. I pulled Sarah away from the window. "It's a trick," I whispered. We hurried to the back door and slipped out into the garden. My heart was racing. Mark had sent someone to find us. We ran through the neighbor's yard and called James from my cell phone. He was alarmed and said he'd contact the real police immediately. We hid in a nearby cafe until we got the all clear. This chase was exhausting. I felt decades older, and Sarah was on the verge of collapse. James met us at the cafe and confirmed that the police had arrested Mark at his home. He was in custody, and they were processing the evidence. I should have felt victorious, but I was just tired. Sarah and I hugged, crying softly. We decided to go back to my house now that the immediate threat was over. The pressure was lifting, but the emotional toll remained. At home, the place felt empty without Tommy's laughter. I started cleaning up, trying to find some normalcy. Later that day, a detective visited to update us. Mark was charged with involuntary manslaughter and animal cruelty, based on the evidence. He denied everything, claiming the dogs acted on their own. The case would go to trial, and we had to prepare for a long legal battle. Sarah decided to stay with me for a while, and I was grateful for her company. That evening, as we sat in the living room, the doorbell rang. It was a delivery man with a package for me. I hadn't ordered anything. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a small, stuffed dog toy, the kind Tommy loved. There was no note, but I knew it was from Mark, or someone associated with him. a final attempt to unsettle me. I threw it away, but the message was clear. This wasn't over yet. As I locked up for the night, I looked at Tommy's photo on the mantel. "We'll get justice for you, sweetheart," I promised. But deep down, I wondered if we ever truly would. The stuffed dog toy lay in the trash, but its message lingered in the air like a bad smell. Sarah and I spent the morning cleaning the house, trying to erase the memories of fear. My bones ached from all the running, and I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. James called to say Mark was denied bail due to the severity of the charges, which was a relief. But he warned that Mark's lawyer was aggressive. I needed to ensure our safety and help the prosecution build a strong case. I lost my peace of mind. Every creak in the house made me jump. Later, a detective visited to collect the toy as evidence, but he said it was likely sent by one of Mark's friends from the kennel club. As he left, I noticed a car parked down the street with a man inside, just watching. I called James back, and he advised installing security cameras. Sarah and I went to the electronics store, feeling exposed in public. While comparing cameras, I saw Doug, Mark's business partner, in the parking lot. He didn't see me, but his presence felt like a threat. We bought a simple system and hurried home. As I mounted a camera by the front door, my hands shook, remembering Tommy helping me with chores. That evening, the doorbell rang again. It was a process server with papers from Mark's lawyer, suing me for defamation and emotional distress. I signed for them, my heart sinking. Sarah read them and burst into tears. "He's trying to silence us," she said. I hugged her, feeling the weight of this new battle. Just as we settled down to eat, the security camera app on my phone alerted me to motion outside. I checked the feed and saw a shadowy figure placing something on the porch. I didn't dare open the door. I called the police to report the suspicious activity, and they sent an officer to check the porch. He found a folded note that read, "Drop the charges or else." No fingerprints, they said. The constant threats were wearing me down. I felt older and more fragile each day. Sarah insisted we stay with Martha again, but I didn't want to endanger another friend. I aimed to strengthen the case against Mark while protecting ourselves. James recommended a victim advocate from the district attorney's office, and I agreed to meet her. It meant sacrificing my privacy, as I'd have to share painful details. The advocate, a woman named Lisa, came to our house the next morning. She was kind and listened as I recounted everything. She suggested applying for a protective order against Mark and his associates, which we did immediately. After she left, I felt a bit safer, but the pressure returned when James called with bad news. Mark's lawyer had filed a motion to dismiss the case, claiming the evidence was obtained illegally through trespassing. My heart raced. If that succeeded, Mark could walk free. I spent the afternoon digging through old photos and documents, looking for anything to support our case. In a box of Tommy's school things, I found a drawing he made of Uncle Mark's scary dogs, with red crayons scribbled on them. It was dated the week before he disappeared. I showed it to James, and he said it could help establish Mark's negligence. That evening, as Sarah and I were watching TV, the doorbell rang. Through the camera, I saw a woman I didn't recognize. She held up a badge. It was a reporter from the local news. She wanted a statement about the case. I didn't answer, but her presence meant the story was going public. Later, I got a text from an unknown number. "Talk to the press, and things will get worse." I blocked the number, but the fear stayed. The reporter camped outside our house for hours, so Sarah and I decided to leave through the back alley to avoid her. We drove to James's office to discuss the motion to dismiss. He was confident we could fight it, but it would require a hearing. I needed to testify about how I obtained the evidence, which meant admitting I broke into Mark's house. I risked potential legal trouble for myself, but I had to do it for Tommy. James prepared me for the questions, and we scheduled the hearing for the following week. The pressure mounted as Mark's supporters started an online campaign calling me a liar. Sarah found nasty comments on social media, and it upset her deeply. To escape, we visited Tommy's grave that afternoon. It was quiet and peaceful, but I felt a pang of guilt for not protecting him. As we placed flowers, I noticed fresh footprints near the headstone, too large to be mine or Sarah's. Someone had been there recently. We left quickly, feeling watched. Back home, I checked the security footage and saw a man in a hoodie lurking around the house earlier. I called the police again, but they said without a direct threat, there was little they could do. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I sorted through more of Tommy's belongings. In his jacket pocket, I found a receipt from a gas station dated the day he disappeared. It was for snacks, and the location was near Mark's hunting spot. I realized Tommy must have bought it before they went into the woods. This receipt could help timeline the events. I sent a picture to James, and he said he'd add it to the evidence. Just as I was feeling hopeful, the power in the house went out. I peered out the window and saw a figure running away from the electrical box. The power outage lasted an hour, and Sarah was terrified. We sat in the dark with flashlights, waiting for the utility company to come. When the lights came back on, I inspected the electrical box and found the lock broken. This was no accident. It was a deliberate act to scare us. I called the police, and they took a report, but without witnesses, it was hard to prove who did it. I needed to get through the hearing and keep us safe until then. We lost our sense of security. I started sleeping with a phone by my bed. The next day, James came over to review my testimony. He warned me that Mark's lawyer would try to paint me as a confused old woman with a grudge. I practiced my answers, focusing on the facts. Later, Martha stopped by with groceries and stayed for tea. She mentioned seeing Doug at the post office, and he seemed nervous. He avoided eye contact, she said. I wondered if Doug knew more than he let on. After she left, I decided to call Doug myself. When he answered, I confronted him about the threats. He denied everything but sounded shaky. I just handle the paperwork, Helen. I don't know anything about what happened to Tommy, he said before hanging up. That evening, the doorbell rang, and through the camera, I saw a delivery man with a bouquet of flowers. The card read, "Thinking of you," with no name. I didn't trust it, so I left them outside. Later, James called with news. The judge had denied the motion to dismiss, so the case would proceed. I felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. He added that Mark was claiming he had an alibi for part of that day, provided by a friend. We needed to disprove it. As I hung up, I noticed the flowers were gone from the porch, but in their place was a single, muddy dog leash. The dog leash left on the porch felt like a direct threat. I called the police immediately, and they collected it for evidence. Sarah was on edge, suggesting we move to a hotel until the trial, but I didn't want to be driven from my home. I was determined to stay put and see this through, no matter the emotional toll. James arranged for a patrol car to pass by our house regularly, which helped a little. The next morning, we had the hearing about the evidence. I testified about finding the fang and the kennel logs, explaining how I suspected Mark from the start. The judge allowed the evidence, ruling that it was obtained in good faith. It was a small victory, but Mark's lawyer glared at me the whole time. Afterward, Sarah and I went to a cafe to decompress. We talked about Tommy and how much we missed him. It was the first time in weeks I felt a moment of normalcy. But as we left, I saw Doug sitting in a car across the street, watching us. He drove away quickly when he noticed me looking. That afternoon, I met with Lisa, the victim advocate, to discuss trial preparation. She said the prosecution was strong, but it could take months. The waiting was agonizing. I just wanted closure. Back home, I checked the mail and found a letter from the bank about a loan I didn't apply for. Someone was trying to ruin my credit. I called the bank to report the fraud, and they said they'd investigate. It felt like Mark's reach was everywhere. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, the security camera alerted me again. I checked the feed and saw a figure messing with my car in the driveway. I called 911, and the police arrived within minutes. They caught the person. It was a young man I didn't know, but he had a kennel club membership card in his wallet. He was arrested for vandalism, but as the officers led him away, he shouted, "Mark says hello!" I stood there, trembling, realizing that even from jail, Mark was still pulling strings. The police took the young man away, but his words echoed in my ears. "Mark says hello!" I stood in my driveway, watching the taillights disappear, my whole body trembling. Sarah rushed out and put an arm around me, leading me back inside. We locked the doors and checked all the windows. I couldn't let fear win. I had to push forward with the case. I aimed to find someone in Mark's circle who would break and testify against him. I called James first thing in the morning and told him about the vandal and the kennel club card. He said he'd add it to the witness intimidation evidence. I lost my peace. Every night, I jumped at shadows, and my sleep was filled with nightmares of Tommy and those dogs. Later that day, I decided to visit the kennel club myself, under the pretense of inquiring about membership. I brought Sarah for support. The club was a modest building on the edge of town. Inside, a woman at the desk greeted us coldly. When I mentioned Mark's name, her demeanor shifted. "We have no comment on ongoing legal matters," she said, then pointedly turned away. As we left, I noticed Doug's car in the parking lot. He was talking to another man, and when he saw me, he quickly got in his car and drove off. That evening, James called with an update. The prosecution had found financial records showing Mark paid off the kennel club to silence complaints about his dogs. It was another piece, but we needed a person to corroborate. Just as I was feeling hopeful, my doorbell rang. Through the camera, I saw a woman holding a stack of papers. It was another lawsuit, this time from Mark's mother, claiming I was alienating Sarah from the family. I signed for it, my hands shaking. Sarah read it and burst into tears. "They won't stop," she sobbed. I hugged her, feeling the weight of this endless battle. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Drop it now, or the next visit won't be so gentle." The text message felt like a final warning. I showed it to James, and he advised we report it to the police for the record. I was tired of living in constant fear, but I couldn't back down. I wanted to get Doug to talk. He seemed the most nervous in Mark's circle. I needed to approach him carefully, without scaring him off. Sarah and I drove to his neighborhood, parking down the street from his house. We waited for him to come home from work. It came at a high price. I felt like a stalker, and the guilt gnawed at me. When Doug's car pulled in, I got out and walked toward him. He saw me and froze. "What do you want, Helen?" he asked, his voice tight. I kept my tone calm. "I know you're not a bad person, Doug. You just got mixed up with Mark. But a little boy is dead. Please, help us get justice." He looked down, shuffling his feet. "I can't. Mark has stuff on me too," he whispered. Then he hurried inside. As we drove away, I felt defeated, but Sarah pointed out that he didn't outright deny it. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I sorted through old emails. I found one from Mark from years ago, bragging about how Doug helped him cover up a dog attack. I forwarded it to James. Early the next morning, James called, excited. The email could pressure Doug to cooperate. He said he'd have a detective reach out to Doug formally. Later, Sarah and I were at the grocery store when I saw Mark's mother in the produce section. She glared at us and then deliberately turned her back. It was a small thing, but it hurt. As we checked out, the cashier, a young man, said, "Rough day?" And I realized my hands were shaking. Back in the car, Sarah said, "We need a break, Mum." But just then, my phone rang. It was Doug. "Meet me at the diner in an hour. Alone." I drove to the diner alone, my heart pounding. Doug was in a back booth, nursing a coffee. I slid in across from him. He looked tired and scared. "I'll talk, but only if I get immunity," he said quietly. I told him I couldn't promise that, but I'd have James contact him. He nodded and then spilled it all. He confirmed that Mark had Brutus dispose of Tommy after a hunting accident went wrong. Mark didn't want the blame, so he covered it up. Doug had helped clean the kennel and falsify records. My stomach churned. Hearing it out loud made it real. I thanked him and left quickly, calling James from the car. He said he'd arrange a meeting with the DA. I risked Doug's trust, and I feared retaliation from Mark's friends. When I got home, Sarah was anxious, but I reassured her. That afternoon, James called back. Doug had agreed to testify in exchange for a plea deal. It was a huge breakthrough, but the pressure intensified. Mark's lawyer filed a motion to delay the trial, claiming new evidence. We had to fight it. Later, I was in the backyard, tending to Tommy's favourite rose bush, when I noticed a drone hovering overhead. It had a small camera. I waved my arms, and it flew away, but I felt violated. I called the police, but they said drones were hard to trace. That evening, Sarah and I were watching the news when a story came on about animal cruelty laws being strengthened, thanks to cases like ours. It felt like a small victory. But as I went to bed, I checked the security cameras and saw a figure in a hoodie lurking near the fence. I called 911, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. They found a note tied to the fence. "Last warning." I knew we were running out of time. The note from the fence was added to the evidence pile, but it felt like we were drowning in threats. I needed to stay strong for the trial, which was now just weeks away. I needed to prepare my testimony and protect Sarah. We decided to stay with James for a few days, as his home had better security. Leaving my own house felt like surrendering, but Sarah's safety came first. At James's, we went over my statement repeatedly. He warned me that Mark's lawyer would try to confuse me, but I practiced staying calm and factual. The pressure was immense. I had nightmares of being cross-examined. One afternoon, Martha visited with homemade soup. She mentioned that Mark's mother was spreading rumors about me being senile. It stung, but I shrugged it off. Later, James got a call from the DA. Doug's testimony was solid, and they had additional witnesses from the Kennel Club coming forward. It seemed the tide was turning. But that evening, Sarah got a call from her bank. Someone had tried to access her accounts using her social security number. We reported it as fraud, but it was clear Mark's network was still active. The next day, we returned home to get more clothes. As I packed, I found Tommy's old baseball glove in the closet. I held it to my chest, tears welling up. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. It was a delivery from a pet store, a bag of dog treats with a note. For Brutus. I threw it out, but the message was clear. They knew how to hurt me. That night, James called with good news. The judge had denied the motion to delay, and the trial was on schedule. I felt a glimmer of hope, but as I hung up, the power in the house flickered and went out. We sat in darkness, listening to the silence, wondering what would happen next. The power came back on after 10 minutes, but the fear lingered. I checked the security cameras and saw nothing, but I knew it was another warning. I had to make it through the trial without breaking. Sarah and I spent the next days rehearsing my testimony and avoiding public places. It took a toll on our mental health. We were both on edge, jumping at every noise. James arranged for a security detail to watch the house during the trial, which helped a little. The pressure peaked when Mark's lawyer subpoenaed my medical records, trying to prove I was unfit. My doctor provided a letter confirming I was of sound mind, but the invasion hurt. The day before the trial, I visited Tommy's grave alone. I told him I was fighting for him, and I felt a strange calmness. As I turned to leave, I saw Doug standing a distance away. He nodded at me, then got in his car and drove off. It felt like a silent apology. That evening, Sarah and I had a quiet dinner, talking about Tommy and happier times. We laughed for the first time in weeks, and it felt good. But as we cleaned up, the doorbell rang. Through the camera, I saw a man in a suit holding a briefcase. He identified himself as a process server with another document from Mark's mother, this time challenging my custody of Sarah's future children, a ridiculous claim, but it shook Sarah. She started crying, and I held her, promising we'd get through this. After he left, I checked the camera footage and noticed a car parked down the street with someone inside, watching the house. I called the security detail, and they drove over to check, but the car sped away before they arrived. I locked up for the night, feeling exhausted. As I lay in bed, I thought about the trial starting tomorrow. I knew it would be the hardest day of my life, but I was ready. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "See you in court." I deleted it, but the words hung in the air, a reminder that the battle was far from over. That courtroom felt so big and cold when I walked in, sending a little shiver right through me. My sweet granddaughter Lily held my hand tight, her small grip giving me comfort. At 72, I've seen my share of life's ups and downs, but sitting in that trial over my grandson, Tommy's ordeal, weighed heavy on my heart. My daughter Sarah was right there behind me, and just having her close by steadied my nerves. When I settled into the witness box, Mark's lawyer began his questions. He dug into the day I found that dog fang in Tommy's backpack, even suggesting I might have placed it there myself. I kept my voice calm and told the truth exactly as I remembered it. Then he made sly remarks about my age, hinting my memory might be fading. Well, after raising 3 children and helping with 5 grandchildren, my mind is plenty sharp, and a wave of irritation washed over me. Thankfully, our lawyer objected, and the judge sided with him. During the break, Sarah passed me a bottle of water, her hands trembling slightly. "You're doing great, Mom," she whispered, and those simple words lifted my spirits. Back inside, I noticed one of Mark's friends from the dog kennel lounging in the back row, smirking right at me. I'll admit, it unsettled me. I took a deep breath and focused on Tommy's school drawing of those frightening dogs, explaining how it lined up with what we'd uncovered. The lawyer pressed harder, asking if I held a grudge against Mark because of our family disputes. I met his gaze and said firmly, "I want justice for my grandson." When I stepped down, my legs felt a bit unsteady, but I kept my head held high. Outside, a reporter tried to approach us, but my son-in-law James gently steered me toward the car. On the drive home, I reflected on how all this trouble began with a simple spat with our neighbours, and now it had spiralled into this. Back at my house, I went straight to check the security cameras I'd installed when the problems started. And there it was, a fresh, jagged scratch on my car door, clear as day on the screen. Someone had been here while we were at the courthouse. A cold dread crept over me. I called Sarah immediately, and we agreed to contact the police first thing in the morning. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and sat at my kitchen table, feeling weary down to my bones, but more determined than ever. No one will frighten me away from standing up for my family. The next morning, I was back in that courtroom. My heart felt heavy, like a sack of stones. Doug sat on the witness stand, and at last, he told the whole truth. He described how my son-in-law Mark had pressured him into helping cover up what happened to my dear grandson Tommy. Doug said Mark made him clean the kennel and change the records after Tommy disappeared. Hearing those cold facts laid out for everyone made me feel sick to my stomach, but I was so grateful he was finally speaking up. We needed the jury to understand, yet each word felt like another crack in our family. Mark's lawyer tried to make Doug seem dishonest, suggesting he only confessed because he cut a deal to help himself. During a short break, my daughter Sarah and I slipped into the ladies' room for a moment of quiet. I heard Mark's mother in the next stall muttering about liars and people causing trouble, which just added to the weight of the day. That afternoon, the prosecutors presented the DNA evidence. They showed that the blood on our old dog Brutus's collar matched Tommy's exactly. When the lab technician explained how the testing worked, the courtroom grew so quiet you could have heard a leaf drop outside. I reached into my coat pocket and held tight to Tommy's photograph, the one where he's grinning with that gap from his missing front tooth. Keeping that picture close always gives me a little strength when things get tough. After court wrapped up, my son James drove Sarah and me home. We were all exhausted and mostly silent during the ride, each lost in our own thoughts. But as we turned onto my street, I saw it. A for sale sign planted right in the middle of my front lawn. It was a nasty, mean-spirited trick, no doubt from someone on Mark's side. I was angry, and my hands trembled as I marched over and pulled that sign straight out of the ground. Sarah didn't waste a moment. She called the police right away, and they promised to keep a closer watch on the house for us. That evening, I couldn't settle my nerves. I brewed a nice cup of chamomile tea and sat down at the kitchen table with our family photo albums. As I flipped through the pages, I came across a tender picture of Tommy sitting on my lap, his face lit up with laughter while I read him a bedtime story. The memories washed over me, and for the first time in weeks, I let the tears flow freely. I must have dozed off in my armchair because the buzzing of my phone startled me awake. It was a text from an unknown number that read, "You'll pay for this." I deleted it immediately, but a chill of fear settled deep in my bones. I felt scared, so I got up and carefully checked all the locks on the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure, that old familiar worry creeping back into my heart. I sat in that stuffy courtroom on the last day of the trial, my back aching from the hard wooden bench. The lawyer for the other side, a man in a fancy suit, stood up and laid out all the proof against Mark. He talked about the forged papers for my house deed, the fake entries in my dog's kennel logs, and how my neighbour Doug said under oath that Mark had been lying to get control of my property. Mark's own lawyer tried to turn it all around, calling me a meddling old grandmother stirring up family trouble. I felt my face grow hot with anger, but I kept quiet, clutching my purse in my lap. My arthritis was acting up from all the stress, and I felt every one of my 72 years. Then the jury went off to decide, and we were told it might take hours or even days. My daughter Sarah drove me to a little cafe near the courthouse. We found a corner table and ordered tea, but neither of us could drink much. We didn't talk about the case. It was too nerve-wracking. Every time the door opened, I jumped, thinking it might be someone with news. My son-in-law James showed up after a while and sat with us, patting my hand and saying, "Don't worry, Mom, it'll be all right." But I saw the tightness around his eyes and knew he was just as worried as I was. I thought about my grandkids and how I didn't want them dragged into this mess. After what felt like forever, my phone buzzed. The jury had reached a verdict. We hurried back to the courthouse, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might leap out of my chest. Inside, I spotted Mark for the first time in weeks. He looked pale and thin, but he still had that stubborn set to his jaw. When the judge read out "guilty on all counts," a huge wave of relief washed over me. Tears welled up in my eyes, and Sarah started crying too. I wrapped my arms around her and held her tight, feeling like a heavy weight had finally lifted. But as we walked out of the courtroom, Mark's mother suddenly screamed, "This isn't over!" She had to be led away by a court officer. Outside, a crowd of reporters swarmed us, shoving microphones and cameras in our faces. James stepped in front, shielding Sarah and me as he guided us to the car. On the drive home, I leaned back in the seat and let out a long sigh, starting to believe this nightmare might really be behind me. But when James pulled up to my house, I saw it. A bunch of dead flowers lying on my front porch. Tucked among the wilted petals was a note in messy handwriting. "He'll appeal." My stomach dropped, and I knew deep down this fight for my home and my peace wasn't done yet. The days after the verdict all blurred together. I tried to get back to my normal routine, watering my geraniums on the porch, having my morning tea at the kitchen table. But I couldn't shake the worry. Mark's appeal was still hanging over us, and I knew I had to protect what was left of our family. My daughter Sarah made the brave decision to start divorce papers. I stood by her, of course, but my heart ached. It meant more lawyers, more forms, more stress. We were both so tired. The house felt too quiet without my grandson Tommy's laughter filling the halls. One morning, I gathered my courage to clean out Tommy's old room. He was my youngest grandchild, and losing him still felt like a fresh cut. I packed up his toy cars and stuffed animals to give to the church shelter. Each little truck or bear brought back a memory. I had to sit on the edge of the bed and just cry for a bit. It was heartbreaking, but I knew it needed doing. Later that week, my neighbour Martha came by with a warm apple pie. We sat out in my small garden under the old oak tree and chatted about easier times, back when our kids were little and life felt safer. Then a drone buzzed overhead. We hurried inside and locked the door tight. I felt a knot of fear in my stomach. It was a clear sign that someone was still watching, still trying to frighten us. The next day, I got a call from the bank. Someone had tried to take out a loan using my name. Again. I spent the whole afternoon on the phone, checking my accounts and adding extra security. It left me feeling violated, like my privacy had been stomped on. Later, my son-in-law James called to say Mark had been sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for many years. Part of me felt relief, but it was a hollow win. Tommy was still gone. That evening, Sarah and I drove to the cemetery. We brought fresh daisies and a small toy dog that Tommy had adored. We stood by his grave, holding hands, not saying much. For a moment, I felt a sense of peace, as if he was right there with us. As we turned to go, I spotted Doug, Mark's brother, across the way. He just nodded slowly, with a respectful look, before walking away. It was odd, but it didn't feel threatening. Back at home, I checked the security cameras my son had set up. Nothing seemed out of place, but I still went around and double-checked every window and door lock. That night, I dreamed of Tommy running through a sunny field, laughing and free. When I woke up, I felt a calm I hadn't known in months. It was a small comfort, but I held on to it tight. The appeal process took months, but in the end, it was denied. Mark would stay in prison, and I felt a deep sense of relief wash over me. At my age, with grown children and grandchildren to think about, I was just thankful the worry was behind me. I turned my attention to rebuilding my life with my daughter Sarah. We started with simple things, like planting a new garden in the backyard in memory of my son Tommy. I chose flowers he always loved, like bright marigolds and cheerful daisies. Digging in the soil with my own hands felt calming, and when those first green shoots popped up, it gave me a feeling of peace. I needed some quiet after all the hurt. Letting go of the anger wasn't easy, but it helped us begin to heal. Sarah moved into a cozy apartment nearby, so we began having weekly dinners at my house. I'd make a pot roast or a simple pasta dish, and we'd sit around the kitchen table sharing stories about Tommy. Sometimes my grandchildren, Sarah's kids, Emma and Jake, would join us. Hearing their laughter as they played in the living room filled me with joy and reminded me what truly matters in life. One pleasant afternoon, I sat on the porch with an old photo album. I smiled at pictures of Tommy as a little boy and others of my grandkids at their school events. My friend Martha stopped by, and we had tea at the kitchen table. We chatted about our grandchildren. Her grandson is learning piano, and my Emma is reading books all on her own now. We even talked about maybe taking a bus trip together to see the autumn leaves. All the pressure from Mark's supporters had faded away, and I felt safe and content again. I decided to donate the last of the evidence to a charity that fights animal cruelty. I drove down to their office, hoping it might help prevent others from suffering like Tommy did. Later, I visited the library where I used to look up information on dog breeds. The librarian, a kind woman named Betty, smiled and asked how I was doing. I told her, "I'm moving forward, one step at a time," and I truly meant it. That evening, I went into Tommy's room. It's a quiet place now, with his photos hanging on the walls. I gently touched his face in one picture and whispered, "I love you, always." Then I closed the door, not with a heavy heart, but filled with warm, treasured memories. The next day, Sarah and I volunteered at the local animal shelter. We helped clean kennels and spent time playing with the dogs. As I petted a gentle Labrador, I felt Tommy's spirit close by. I knew that by helping these animals find good homes, we were honoring him in our own way. Life will never be the same without my boy, but I believe it can be good again, little by little.